Hello everyone, this is Zooc and today I'm bringing you my last cooking video before I'm going back to Prague, which is in a couple of weeks. So not that long. But at the same time I'll be on a diet, so I won't have as many nasty things to cook as I did last time. I actually gained about 7 kilos during that 1 month in Prague, and that's really not good. I'm currently working on shedding all that back to an acceptable weight. But yeah, anyway, meatballs are one of those things that's very versatile, and there are thousands and thousands of recipes all over the internet. Hard to know which are good and which are not. Of course, it's the same with most foods. It's kind of preference based. Some people will like pork only meatballs. Other people prefer beef meatballs. Sometimes they use almond flour in them or fill them with various nuts. But yeah, they're quite a versatile dish, and you can basically make them out of pretty much anything. There are Asian-style meatballs, Italian-American, strictly Italian, strictly American. There are Romanian meatballs, which have dill in them, dill and parsley, and they're mostly made of pork without any beef at all. Just a lot of variations on it. I'm quite content with this form of meatball, which I've arrived to after some years of experimentation. It's basically a typical Italian-American style meatball with a tomato sauce that's really versatile. You can use it for just about anything, really, from pizza to meatball subs to cooking like Middle Eastern dishes in it as well, minus the red wine that goes in it. Yes, there goes red wine in mine, which is not quite encountered in Mediterranean or Middle Eastern dishes. But regardless, it's still fucking tasty. I'm kind of against that notion of doing things according to a classical recipe or going for authenticity. I prefer to go for taste. If there is an ingredient that I know will enhance the taste of what I'm doing, anything from soy sauce to red wine to stuff that's not part of the culture surrounding a particular dish, I won't hesitate to add it. And, you know, an entire genre of cooking has sprouted from this, which is fusion. Fusion-style cooking combines different styles of cooking like Mexican and Chinese. No reason it shouldn't work. French and Asian. You know, there are plenty of variations that you can touch up on, and as long as they taste good, I don't think there's a need to limit yourself by any imposed rules. I mean, the only reason why a lot of recipes are typical and classical and authentic are because the people that were cooking them didn't have the other ingredients when these recipes were developed. They probably didn't have any other forms of herbs, and one of the few vegetables was tomatoes, so they made a tomato sauce with basil and oregano because those were the only things that grew in that area. So it makes sense, right? But nowadays, when you can get your hands on pretty much anything, there's really no reason for limiting yourself. So anyway, enough bullshit. Let's get started. First off, I'm going to make the tomato sauce. Now, I'm going to be cooking this in a slow cooker simply because when I was in Prague, I didn't really have a pot, a non-stick pot that was good enough for this sort of thing, but it easily works the same way on a stove. The slow cooker basically boils everything at 90 degrees temperature, which you can obtain by just dropping the heat on the stove to low. That's pretty much the same exact thing. So to start off, I have 3 onions. They're quite small onions, but you can use 2 medium ones or a huge one if you wish. The amount of onions really depends on taste. I like a lot of onions in my tomato sauce because they cook down and they basically disintegrate, and they're just really flavorful. You can't really have tomato sauce without onions in it, in my opinion. But of course, there are people out there that will say they don't like onions, which is absurd, but hey, taste. No accounting for it. So I have 3 small onions, which I'm going to dice. After that, I'm going to shred half of a big carrot. Yes, carrot and tomato sauce is actually not that weird. Basic ragu or a meat sauce is often made with onions, carrots, celery as well, and did I say something else? Onions, carrots, celery, and tomatoes, obviously. But I'm going to choose to only use carrot for this because it has that natural sweetness that it brings to the tomato sauce, and its flavor is actually not noticeable at all once it cooks down enough. I also have 2 cloves of garlic, which I'm going to grate. Now, with the garlic, don't go nuts on it. I'm a person who really likes garlic, and as you can see in that video, I went a bit nuts with it. That's basically like a fucking fistful of garlic that I have there. And it turned out that it did overpower the sauce a little bit. Garlic is very strong, and a little goes a long way. So I would suggest only 2 cloves. I probably grated about 5 or 6 there, which was a bit overkill. It was still good, but it could have done with a little bit less garlic. And now in a pot, I'm going to put about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of olive oil and also a bit of butter. Combining olive oil and butter is totally fine. It's a practice that's encountered a lot in restaurants. And you'll often hear that you don't add butter because it'll burn, and you add olive oil and butter because olive oil facilitates the not burning of the butter, which is bullshit. Because no matter what you add, the milk solids will burn anyway, because that's the only thing that actually burns in butter. It's the milk solids. With clarified butter, it won't burn. So that myth is just bullshit. But the butter is for flavor, and I would suggest adding it anyway. And then you toss in your veggies, and you saute that for 5 minutes. And then you add about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. A tomato paste is one of those things that I can't really do without when it comes to tomato sauce. It has a deep, deep tomato flavor, and it's really good in most tomato-based sauces. But it has to be cooked. You can't add it raw, because it has a very unpleasant taste to it when it's raw. Once it cooks down, though, it's really mellow and nice. So after the tomato paste, you add the garlic, and you cook that down for 5 more minutes, after which you add a couple of bay leaves, about a tablespoon of oregano, about 2 teaspoons of basil, and you keep cooking that down for, I would say, a total of 15 minutes on low heat. Basically, these veggies need to soften a bit, they need to sweat a bit. The condiments and the herbs and the spices that you add there need to soak up into the vegetables. And once that happens, you should probably also add a bit of salt and pepper at this moment. It's kind of important to season this sauce throughout the whole thing, because it's going to cook down for about an hour, and it's going to be kind of tricky to get it down at the very beginning, because the salt and the pepper will behave differently depending on how you add them throughout the cooking of a dish. So just keep tasting throughout that 1 hour of slow cooking, and eventually you'll reach a state that tastes fine to you. After adding and cooking down all of these stuffs, you add 2 cans of crushed tomatoes and a few tablespoons of tomato puree. Also, at this point, I would probably add a splash of red wine and, lo and behold, some ketchup. Now, this is one of those shitty maneuvers that you do, which is frowned upon, adding ketchup in tomato sauce. It's blasphemy. But to be honest, it adds a great taste to it, and I would not hesitate adding it in a 5-star restaurant as much as I would at home. It's really fine. And once you've finished adding all the stuff in it, close the lid or put a lid on the pot. Leave it on lowest possible heat for about an hour. Come back to it, keep stirring throughout, taste it. If it tastes fine to you, if it's possible that it needs more sugar, you can also add sugar to it, of course. It really depends on the acidity of the tomatoes that you're using. A lot of times the tomatoes that you find in Eastern Europe are not amazing, even the canned ones. Of course, it works making this out of fresh tomatoes if you prefer, although it's kind of a pain peeling all of them and cutting them up. But hey, it's your choice, and I would definitely encourage that over canned tomatoes. But it just so happens that I was in possession of some San Marzano tomatoes, which are generally regarded to be the best tomatoes for tomato sauce, especially when we're talking Italian. San Marzano. Look for it in supermarkets if you can get your hands on it. I know they have them in American supermarkets like Harris Teeter and maybe even Food Lion. So if you find those, go for them. They're a bit more pricey, but they're really worth it. They're really good tomatoes. So that's about it for the sauce. You can cook this down infinitely. Basically, you can get it to almost solid consistency if you want, depending on how much you've cooked it. I think the most I've ever cooked a tomato sauce is about 3 hours, and it was totally worth it, I think. It was still done in the same slow cooker, and it was so good once it was done, you could eat it with a spoon as it was. Really, really rich and flavorful and just plain fucking awesome. So just keep tasting it. An hour is, I would say, the minimum that you should leave it for this particular sauce, but that's just personal preference. Hell, you could even make an uncooked tomato sauce, and it would probably be pretty decent if you added a different quantity of vegetables and spices to it. So now let's move on to the meatballs, which is the star of the show. Now, for meatballs, there are a few things to keep in mind. You cannot really have tender, soft meatballs without a panade. What a panade is a mixture of bread and a liquid, preferably milk. What this does is soak up the flavors and fat from the meat that gets shed during the cooking process, and it makes the meatball really soft and tender. It's like basically a classic thing. You should do it all the time when you're talking meatballs. So what you do, you grab 2-3 slices of bread and you soak them in about 2/3 of a cup of milk. You could also use breadcrumbs. You could also use saltine crackers. Just put those in a food processor and pulse them down to the consistency of breadcrumbs. Soak them with 2/3 of a cup of milk, and that's it. Just leave them for a while until it soaks up all the liquid. Then, next up, onions. I prefer to add onions in my meatballs as well because onions are fucking amazing. But I need to cook them. Raw meatballs and onions don't really get cooked down during the frying because these are going to be fried meatballs and the slow cooking that ensues after that. So I would prefer to saute my onions for about 5 to 10 minutes to soften them and bring out that sweet flavor that they give. So just dice 2 small onions or a medium one and put it in a pan with with a tablespoon of butter and some olive oil. Same deal. Put it on a medium-low flame and just saute it for, actually not saute, but sweat, because it needs to cook down slowly for about 10 minutes. Now in a big-ass bowl, you put in a pound of ground meat and a pound of ground pork. Ground meat only meatballs are a bit dry and they're a bit unilateral, I would say. They're not as good as they could be. So I really suggest combining pork and beef. You can do pork and veal, not really chicken. Stay away from chicken when we're talking Italian meatballs. It's not amazing. I've done it. It just doesn't fit. Pork and beef is fine. So just do that. You add 1 egg, and then you grate 2 garlic cloves on top of that. You add the panade to it, which by this point should have soaked up all the milk. You add 1 cup of grated parmesan or grated pecorino romano. What I happened to have was pecorino romano, but there's really not that much difference. It is very important, though, that you add this grated cheese because it has a lot of umami flavor in it, and it has a lot of salt in it, so it's just going to permeate throughout the meatballs and give them a really nice taste. After the parmesan, you should add the onions, but a trick I did here was to dissolve a cube of gelatin beef stock in a little bit of water that I put in the pan with the onions, and it's just made it into this really flavorful beefy oniony paste that you just add to the meatballs, and it gives them just another layer of beefiness. Because let's be honest, the meat you buy in supermarkets nowadays isn't really amazing. It's kind of bland and flavorless. So to make up for that, I prefer to use these artificial quote-unquote enhancers, and I'm really quite fine with the repercussions of it. So just dissolve a cube of beef with like a few tablespoons of water and add that to the onions, mix it all in, and then pour it on top of the meat mixture. Then you add your dried herbs, which is about a tablespoon of oregano and however much basil you want. You can probably skip the basil, but I added about 1 to 3 teaspoons of basil here, which is, I guess, about a tablespoon. Don't go nuts with it, though. And then half a cup of fresh parsley. Do not use dried parsley. Parsley is also really important in meatballs. There are few key ingredients which make an Italian meatball Italian, Italian American, if you will, because I believe that Italians don't actually eat meatballs. It's more of an American thing, but they're still really tasty. And just get nasty with it. Shove your hand in there, mix it all up. You can use a pastry cutter as well, or a spatula, or 2 spatulas, or however many spatulas you have. Or the best way, I think, is just to use your hand, but watch out for the onions that you just added in there because they might still be a bit hot with the oil and the butter and everything, so you don't want to burn yourself. After the mixture is homogenized, form the meatballs. However many you want, you can weigh them out. There should be about 20 meatballs, of 20 golf-sized meatballs in this mixture, but I got 16 bigger ones because I wasn't really measuring, and that's totally cool. And put them on a sheet pan, brush it with oil, put them on a sheet pan, and then put them in the fridge for 30 minutes. This is kind of, at least 30 minutes. This is kind of an important step. My mom never does this, and I've never actually done it before. It's the first time I attempted it, but I will always be refrigerating my meatballs from now on. They just hold better when you fry them after that. The mixture gets hardened up a bit. It recuperates from all the mashing and massaging that you did with it, and it's just a better way to do it. After 30 minutes have passed, grab a pan, put it on high heat. Heat up about half a centimeter to a centimeter of oil. That's 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch of oil. and start flouring your meatballs. Why do we flour meatballs? Because it makes them that much more awesome. And once you put them in the sauce, because these are going to be finished cooking in the sauce, they will thicken up the sauce to a great consistency. The flour from them will start acting as it boils, and it'll just be awesome. So trust me, please. Flour your meatballs and start putting them in the hot oil. The heating up of the oil should take about 5 minutes, I think, maximum. And leave them for 2 minutes per side. Well, this really largely depends on what kind of stove you have, but just leave them until they form a brown crust like you see in the video. It doesn't matter if they're cooked all the way through. They shouldn't even be that way. Forget about it. Don't stress it. You only need the crust in this particular situation. They're going to be finished in the sauce, and you can leave them in the sauce for however much you want. They're not going to disintegrate or break apart. Of course, you need to remember that you add salt to these before you form them into meatballs. That's one aspect that I forgot to cover. Salt and a lot of pepper. But that should come as common sense. Like, I don't think you should ever have to tell anyone to add salt to something. It's kind of, I don't know, it's just common sense to me. But indeed, I forgot to say that. So yeah, salt and a lot of pepper, or however much you want. Doesn't really depend on me, really. So fry the meatballs in 2 batches. First off, because you don't want to crowd the pan. Secondly, because they won't fucking fit in there, as you can probably tell. I have a rather big pan, but even so, the meatballs are of significant size. So fry them in 2 batches until they're nice and golden. Fry the second batch. Don't worry about them getting cold. And once they are done, once they have a nice bright brown crust, add them to the sauce. Bury them in that shit. And then close the lid and leave it for about 20 to 25 minutes. It's kind of a long process altogether. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But I think it's really worth it because these are fucking delicious and they're so soft and so tender. And I'm really sorry that I don't have a picture of like how it looks inside. But this is about the 4th time I made them, I think. And every time they come out equally awesome. So yes, a rather long video for a rather long cooking of meatballs. But it's really worth it because I think a lot of recipes that I've tried of meatballs are just misguided. Some of them will add ricotta cheese to them. That's interesting. I've actually never done that, but I will definitely try it. It does look like something that might make them better, although I have a few doubts. Other recipes will not add breadcrumbs and milk to them, which is just pure blasphemy, and you should basically ignore those. Other ones will not add parsley, which is bad. And there are also others which will not add parmesan. That's also pretty shitty. These ingredients all have their role, and they're all, I think, equally important in making a kick-ass meatball. So this is going to be it. My last video before going back to Prague and filming more crazy shit. Hopefully, I'll be able to bring some healthy dishes, although I have a feeling that most people won't really be interested in those. But yeah, anyway, these meatballs, really versatile. They're great on spaghetti, and they're great on pizza, and they're great in a sandwich with some mozzarella on top. Really awesome. Give it a shot, and let me know how it went. Thank you for watching. Please rate that shit, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.